The Bible has become a book that is largely possessed but not read, or read a little bit but not read a lot, or read from an academic or scholarly or intellectual point of view and not read from a spiritual point of view. And on this day, I think it is a tremendous story of hope, but it's also a story of pain. It's a tremendous story of purpose, and it's also a story of opportunity. An opportunity for every human being to be able to know God. Now, this is a really challenging thing if you didn't grow up around churches or you didn't grow up with a faith. That's how I was. It's really challenging to believe a few things. I'll enumerate them now, and then we'll study them. Number one, it's hard to believe that Jesus lived. Now, most people can accept that maybe he was alive and was a teacher or a philosopher, a little bit like Buddha, a little bit like Confucius. They think, yeah, he could be that. But to go from the point where he was alive as the Son of God, for most people, that's a very challenging step. Then the other step is to believe that Jesus not only lived as the Son of God, but then he died. Now, most of us can believe someone died, but not that someone died for other people. And then it becomes really challenging when you get to the point where it said he was buried, which most of us can accept that a dead person should be buried. We're good with that. But then he was buried, and then 3 days later, he rose from the dead. My experience is even people who go to church a lot, read the Bible a lot, and even people who are fervent Christians struggle with the idea that Jesus rose from the dead. How do we know we struggle with that idea? We don't think about it very much. We don't talk about it very much. Because the idea that he actually rose from the dead requires a level of miraculous power that if we believed in it, we would believe it could work in our lives, and we would believe, therefore, nothing would be impossible for our lives. It's about the idea that radical love produces radical change. Let's get into it. It's a story that forces us to make a decision. And in Mark 15, I love to read that chapter because it is a chapter when you read it, to me, the most important thing to do is identify who are you in the story. Now, I can give us all a clue. We're not Jesus. None of us are Jesus in the story, however we might want to be. But when you look around the story of Jesus and the cross, you're going to find a wide assortment of people and their reactions and responses. Some of the most powerful were the religious leaders. And in Mark chapter 15 and verse 1, I'm reading out of the NIV 84 version, very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. The most important thing to understand about Jesus is not just that he came to save, but Jesus forces a decision. You're going to have to decide, do you believe he's the Son of God? Do you believe he died? Do you believe he was buried? And do you believe he was raised again? For many of us who have heard that a lot, Sunday after Sunday for 20 years, it almost bounces off of our hearts. We no longer really take it to heart and say, wait a minute, every day of my life, I've got to make that decision again. You can't make it 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and never revisit it. Every day of our lives, we have to wake up and say, do I still believe that I've got to make a decision about this Jesus? These elders and these chief priests got together because Jesus was posing a problem for them. A simple problem. Everybody who used to follow them was starting to consider following Jesus. And if we look at politics in the world today and power in the world today, we know that people who lead and are out front, celebrities or politicians, are very concerned about their audience. And these guys were seeing their audience shift, and they were getting to make a decision, not whether Jesus was really who he said he was. They were getting ready to make a decision about what are we going to do about this guy who is taking power, siphoning our power away from us. What does that have to do with each one of us? Jesus is a challenge to us having power over our own lives. Jesus comes into our life and says, don't trust yourself. Don't just do what you want to do. There's a better way. And if you and I had been alive in that time, we would have felt the same pressure these guys felt, which is you don't just get to keep living your life the way you want to keep living your life if you're acknowledging that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus died, that he was buried, and that he was raised again. That should change everything. It's a story of envy. Some people ask, why was Jesus killed? And there are a lot of reasons. And they are, for the most part, all true. But one of the most poignant reasons why Jesus was killed was envy. Maybe you're familiar with envy. I'm familiar with envy. When I first studied the Bible as a 19-year-old kid, never having gone to church, and they went through a list of sins in Galatians 5:19. Actually, it was one guy who was studying the Bible with me. He went through the list of sins, and he went through all the sins, and some of the sins I knew. I was like, I know what anger is. I get that one. I didn't know what sexual immorality was. He read that. I was like, I have no idea what that is. I knew what adultery was. I didn't even know completely what selfish ambition was, because I always thought ambition was good. I didn't know that when you put selfish in front of it, it was a problem. I thought it was extra fuel to be more determined. And then he got to envy. I said, what is envy? See, a lot of church-going people think that every church-goer is like everybody else in the world. I hate to break it to you, but most people in the world don't know what the sins are. Most of them don't get mad when the sin list is read because they can't even define what it means. So I said, what is envy? He said, well, envy is like when you look at someone else and you see what they have and you see who they are, you get upset that you can't have that and that you're not that and you want what they've got. I said, well, I did that last night. He said, well, what did you do? I said, well, we were playing flag football, and I've got a pretty good flag football team. And my best friend Frank took me out of the game and put in Billy Pinero. I still remember Billy's name. And then they ran a play, and Billy scored a touchdown. And if I had been in the game, that play would have been for me, and I would have scored the touchdown. And I was like, I should have been Billy that day. He said, you got it. You understand envy. In verse 9, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews, asked Pilate? See, once they reached the decision, they handed Jesus over. One thing you'll see in the Bible is these powerful religious leaders, they didn't want to punish and kill Jesus themselves. Jesus had too many followers. They needed somebody to do it for them. And their motivation was not, well, we know he's not the Son of God. Their motivation was, we know the impact he's having on our lives, and he's diminishing who we are. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews, asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd that Pilate release Barabbas instead. Now, Barabbas was a criminal. And notice what these guys do. And you want to say, well, how do I personalize this? Are you an envious person? Do you even think about being envious? Because these guys were driven to kill Jesus, not because they were certain he wasn't the Messiah, but because they were certain that he was diminishing who they were. You could argue that envy is one of the most powerful sins because we don't feel guilty about it. Oftentimes when we envy someone, we feel like a victim. Well, nobody gave me that opportunity. Nobody picked me. Why don't people give me that attention? I'm being treated wrong. These guys were like, we've worked at this. We've been doing this job for a long time. We've been leading these people for a long time. And this half-carpenter dude comes rolling in, doesn't have an education, and starts teaching everybody. That's not right. Have you ever felt that kind of envy in your life? Sometimes we can envy our parents. We can envy a sibling. We can say, well, why can't I be like that person? That's what these dudes were going through. And these dudes would end up facilitating the death of Jesus just because of their envy. Have you ever taken envy that seriously in your life? Have we ever thought about that before? Envy put Jesus on the cross. And guess what? If you look at the whole of Scripture, every time we envy, we're participating in putting Jesus on the cross. It's a story of envy.